welcome back to Historical American Girl Read-Alouds. Today we're going to read the last section of Meet Samantha. We finished the last chapter of the story last time, but this time we're going to read in the back some information about what life would have been like for Samantha back in the Victorian era, around 1904. And with me today I have Samantha wearing her winter coat. This is an official American Girl item. Her winter coat has these cool little, these little decorations here, and she has a blue hat that matches. I'll tell you about Nellie's outfit after we read today. But another thing I have here with me is a little purse, and I also have a purse about the same size that I actually found at an antique store. So I think it's kind of cool. It looks a lot like the official one. Before we start today, I wanted to play the other two records for you that came with the phonograph. This one you're probably familiar with. It's called Take Me Out to the Ball Game. So that song might be familiar to you, since we still sing it at our baseball games today. The next record is the song You're a Grand Old Flag. We don't hear this song as much anymore, but you might have heard it before. That's Your Grand Old Flag. Before we read today, I want to go to the map and show you a little bit about where Samantha and Nellie lived. Here is Samantha on our map of the United States. Samantha lived in the state of New York. She lived in a city called Mount Bedford, New York. But there isn't a real Mount Bedford, New York at all. It's a made-up city. I believe most of the American Girls stories are set in real places, but Samantha's is not. However, it was based on a town called Mount Kisco, New York, which is a real place. And in fact, the house in the background on the Meet Samantha book is a real house in Mount Kisco, New York. And that town is kind of in this southern or lower half of New York, of the state of New York, pretty near New York City. So in some of the later Samantha books, we'll hear about her going to New York City. And so it wasn't too far from Mount Kisco or where Mount Bedford is supposed to be. So she's in that section, just a few states away from Felicity, who was in Virginia, and Kit, who was in Ohio, but quite a distance away from both Josefina and Kaya, who were in the southwest and the northwest part of the United States. A peek into the past. Look at the clothes, rooms, and food on these pages and peek into the stylish, proper world Samantha grew up in. People like Grand Mary lived in large, comfortable houses. They ate their meals in elegant dining rooms. They visited with their guests in fancy parlors, where children were often not allowed at all. When children did join the adults in the parlor, proper behavior was expected. Children like Samantha would curtsy and say, "How do you do?" They would speak only when an adult spoke to them first. Stockings, no supporters, no wrinkles is the advertisement at the top of this page. In 1904, proper young ladies like Samantha wore dresses covered with frilly aprons, high-button shoes, and long stockings held up with garters, even when they were playing. They couldn't climb trees in a pair of jeans like you do. In fact, it really wasn't very proper for young ladies like Samantha to climb trees at all. Imagine sitting down to this table for dinner. You would eat soup, fish, 2 kinds of meat, potatoes, vegetables, and several desserts. Your meal might last for 3 hours. It would have taken nearly all day to prepare. The elegance and comforts of proper life in 1904 were possible because there were many servants to do the work. A cook, like Mrs. Hawkins, spent nearly all day making meals for a family. She had to make just about every dish from scratch since there were no refrigerators or freezers, and there was very little prepared food like cake mix or canned soup. A maid, like Elsa, scrubbed the floors and cleaned the sooty gas lamps that lighted a proper home. A manservant, like Hawkins, tended the vegetable garden in summer and the furnace in winter. He also took care of the horse and fancy carriage that people like Grandmary used instead of a car. The lives of the servants were not very comfortable or elegant. Servants worked long days for little money. Their work was hard because they did not have many of the modern conveniences we have today. Kitchens were usually very hot because stoves had to be kept full of glowing coals, even on the hottest summer days. Without vacuum cleaners, maids had to hang heavy carpets on clotheslines and pound them with rug beaters. Servants who did the laundry didn't have washing machines or dryers. They had to iron the fancy tablecloths, frilly petticoats, and stiff linen sheets with irons that they heated on hot stoves. Servants were expected to do this work without complaint and to keep their proper place, separate from the family they worked for. They ate in the kitchen after the family's meal in the dining room was over. They often lived in small rooms in the attic or above the carriage house. They were not supposed to play with the children or visit with the parents. Even though a servant's life was a hard one, there were plenty of people willing to do these jobs. In 1904, many of the people living in American cities were poor. They would do any kind of work just to help their families survive. If they weren't servants, they often worked in factories for long hours and little pay. Children like Nellie went to work to help their families earn money. Young ladies like Samantha did not work. Drying dishes or making a bed was not considered a proper thing for them to do. In fact, Grandmary would not have expected Samantha to ever work, even as an adult. But modern women like Cornelia had different ideas. They believed that women should do much more than run elegant, comfortable households. In 1904, many young women went to college or studied to become teachers or nurses. They learned to use new office machines like the typewriter. They wanted to help the people who lived in city slums. They wanted to be sure that poor children went to school instead of working. They wanted women to be able to vote. While the rules about what was proper were changing, America was changing in other ways too. Cities were getting bigger and buildings were getting taller. Automobiles were taking the place of horses. Light bulbs were being used instead of gas lamps. Electric irons, vacuum cleaners, and stoves were beginning to make a servant's work easier. To grow up in such a changing world was often confusing, but it was always exciting. And in the picture there, they have some women marching for equal rights. They were marching for women to have the right to vote, the right to own property, and to have all the same rights as men did. In the Samantha's World book today, I'm going to read a little bit about some of the newfangled notions, which means new ideas and new creations that were just coming out in Samantha's time here. Chewing gum. The first chewing gum was tasteless balls of a plant sap called chicle. Soon gum was made into long, thin strips and flavors were added. Newfangled notions. Uncle Guard teased Grandmary that she had not kept up with modern times. By 1904, hundreds of new inventions had begun to change the way people lived, worked, and played. Showers. Some wealthy families had the newest convenience, a shower. Water sprayed in every direction from pipes that curled around the bather. You can see there's a little stool in the shower for them to sit in too. Vroom! Women used to beat carpets with brooms to remove dust. In 1901, a new hand pump machine lifted dirt from the rugs. Then in 1908, William Hoover invented the motorized vacuum cleaner. Bright idea. In 1879, the electric light bulb began to light up homes across the United States. Still, by the end of the century, fewer than 10% of American homes had electricity. Lamps made by Tiffany and Company often had glorious stained glass shades. Telephones. Only some families had telephones in 1904. Several households shared the same telephone wires called party lines. People often secretly listened to one another's calls. Hot dog. On the boardwalk on New York's Coney Island, Charles Feltman tried selling hot sausages wrapped in a roll. The public loved them. Soon, hot dogs were sold at snack stands and restaurants across the country. In 1904, hot dogs cost 5 cents. Up, up, and away. Steel girders, or supports, allowed builders to construct tall buildings called skyscrapers. This skyscraper is called the Flatiron Building because it's shaped like the flat irons people used to press their clothes. The first movies. Buildings called Nickelodeons had rows and rows of little movie machines. A person dropped a nickel into a machine, then turned the crank. The moving picture lasted about 15 seconds. That was their movies. And phonographs. Phonographs let people listen to recorded music in their homes. A person simply turned the crank and placed the needle on the edge of the record. The large horn projected the sound. Just like our phonograph. So Nellie here, we've talked about how she was a servant, and it talked about how in the book that servants' lives were not very fun. They were very, very busy, but it was still much better than working in the horrible factories in the cities. And Nellie today is wearing a traditional Irish outfit because she came from Ireland. The people who lived as servants and worked in factories, the poor people that they were talking about, were generally immigrants from other countries. Back in the middle part of the 1800s, there was a terrible potato famine in Ireland. And potatoes was mostly what the poor people in Ireland survived on. So when the potatoes got a disease, it wiped out all the food. And so starting around the 1850s, many people came from Ireland to the United States. And there were still many immigrants from Ireland coming in around 1904. But the Irish people were not treated well at all, and they were so poor they had to do the jobs that nobody else wanted to do. This outfit she wouldn't have had because she was so poor. I believe maybe later in the books she gets it. I don't actually know when. But this is her like traditional Irish dance outfit and her little headband here. And I especially love this because my family came from Ireland. Some of my family did long ago, so I kind of identify with Nellie being Irish. And I just recently got the book I was hoping to get, The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz came out around this time, and this is an actual reproduction of the real book. And so if you look at the pages and pictures in here, you can see that it was a pretty long book with a lot of chapters and tiny writing. But I'm really excited that I finally got The Wizard of Oz, since that's a special book to me. Well, that's it for Meet Samantha. Thanks so much for reading along with us. We'll see you next time.